Welcome to the Wealth Across Generations podcast. Hello and welcome to the Wealth Across Generations podcast, the podcast where families learn to thrive at all levels and grow together. Here we explore ideas and answers to how families can be successful, happy, emotionally intelligent, and resilient. If you saw the title of this episode, it may have baffled you a little. How do you even say that? Culturally, this is going to be a lot like using a light switch. You don't need to be an electrician, but you do need to know how the lights come on. In episode 2, we talked about the importance of cultural capital, as upstream from intellectual and even financial capital, on a mental model I called the River of Life. And in episode 1, we talked about how being able to survive or avoid persecution is essential to preserving the health and wealth of your family over the long term. Check those episodes out if you haven't yet. This podcast episode will show you a cultural tool for surviving persecution. If you or your children are lucky enough to live the 80 years that King David talks about in the Psalms, 80 years, that means you have a 100% chance of experiencing a civilizational winter season, a 40% chance of seeing massive drought/plague, frost conditions that imperil your nation, and a 20% chance of living through the total collapse of every major institution that has ever interacted with your family. This doesn't even include ethnic cleansings, gulags, inquisitions, campaigns to eliminate corruption, but who defines that and how is it measured? Ideological purity tests or forced migrations? These are the interesting times the ancient Chinese wished their enemies would live to experience. During times like these, people get greedy. The anger that has been kept in check for decades unleashes very suddenly, and even a failing state still has what it takes to take what you've got. So how does a family survive all that? While there are no guarantees in life, you can reduce the likelihood that you or the people you love become the target of jealous elites, immiserated neighbors, and confiscation-happy rulers. In fact, you can live in such a way that in these times, people are glad that you are there and doing well. Unless they are completely given over to evil, in which case, God is your refuge, right? So mentally, let's hop on a plane and go to South Korea. We leave customs in the Seoul Incheon Airport and start riding south-southeast. As we travel, we also move back in time, year by year, until we arrive in a southeast province of Korea called North Gyeongsang. The American equivalent would be like North Carolina. One state south of here is the second largest city of Korea called Busan. But we've gone south enough. Here we stop at a house outside the city of Gyeongju. People are hurrying around using horse carts to carry their provisions and tools back into the city. The clanging of the blacksmith's hammer is heard. People are harvesting rice from nearby rice paddies and carrying heavy sacks on their backs. It is late September, and while humid, the edge that makes the heat unbearable has just gone down enough to make walking pleasant. We're going to visit a home. This home is not owned by a king or queen. In fact, nobody in this family has ever sat on the throne. Yet, they have become wealthy and stayed wealthy for over 300 years and 12 generations. As you enter this house, you realize it's more of a compound with multiple buildings facing each other in a courtyard design, surrounded by walls. After a couple minutes walking, you get the idea to count the rooms this place has, but barely know where to start, when you are told there are in fact 99 rooms, 100 servants, and a storehouse that can store 800 sacks of rice. You look impressed at first, until they mention the rice, and you start blinking a couple times. So they explain each sack of rice is over 315 pounds in weight, and that rice often serves as a form of currency as well as food. So how did this family survive 300 years and yet stay wealthy? To this day, over 4% of the Korean people have their family name, Choi, spelt in English Choi. How did they accomplish so much despite never holding the power of the state? They followed certain rules. As you listen to these rules, compare them to rules you can see wealthy families follow in your culture, whether written or unwritten. Are they similar or different? Rule number 1. You can be an officer, but do not apply for a position higher than jinsa. For some background, Korea during their monarchical periods attempted a merit-based system that filtered competent people into their administrative state via a Confucian literary exam. Despite his name, Confucius was the Plato of Asia, and he had strong opinions about the state, and his writings formed part of the classics studied by elite aspirants of the Far East for thousands of years. While far from perfect, this exam system guaranteed that most officials who helped the king run his country had some knowledge of history, culture, and legal precedents. In theory, it also meant that a person could study hard and gain some upward mobility. Though when you consider the cost of getting a competent instructor, the opportunity cost of not doing manual labor during that time with your family, and the price of books hundreds of years ago, the barrier to entry was still quite high. This Confucian exam system came from China, and even to this day, the Korean SAT, now called the Suneung, is treated with such seriousness that the Korean government schedules air traffic not to fly overhead in their country during the exam. This exam determines what college you can attend, which plays a major role in social status, career, marriage prospects. Anyway, back then, jinsa was the first rank at which you passed the exam, and at that rank or higher, you would receive all courtesy afforded a scholar official. This gave you a government salary, you could wear a fancy black hat, and all you needed to do was serve on the king's think tanks and help carry out mandates on an administrative level. There were 3 ranks above jinsa called byonghwa, ulgwa, and kapgwa, ranked from lowest to highest. As you can see, the Gyeongju Chois wanted to be in the room where it happened, so to speak, to use the Hamilton reference, but they didn't want to draw too much attention to themselves or attract the jealousy of other elites. No matter what their score, they would apply for jinsa-ranked positions only. What do you think this does? If you went to the elite institutions but never tried to go near the brass ring of political control and dominance of the state, anyone who tried to accuse you of trying to usurp power would be laughed at, because you're too far away to have any legitimate claim, and never aimed for anything higher than what would keep you in the decision room. In cases of extreme system-wide corruption, you might be the only one not purged, because you weren't being greedy, but you know enough about how the system works to keep the government from completely shutting down. Jesus himself makes a similar parable in Luke 14 verses 7 through 11. He says, "When Jesus noticed how the guests chose the places of honor at a banquet, he told them a parable. When you are invited to a wedding banquet, do not sit in the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited. Then the host who invited both of you will come and tell you, 'Give this man your seat,' and in humiliation, you will have to take the last place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the last place, so that your host will come and tell you, 'Friend, move up to a better place.' Then you will be honored in front of everyone at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted." That's why applying only for the lowest place prevents feeling humiliated, prevents a sense of entitlement, and avoids all kinds of anger and unnecessary political fights. By the way, I lived in Korea for a while, but I am not Korean. So if I'm wrong about the Korean exam system or the ranks, you are welcome, if you have knowledge of Korean, to correct me on this. If you do so between the release of this episode and the recording of the next, I can issue a correction. Either way, I hope this still can serve as a useful lesson, even if I might not get everything perfect here. So rule 1 was, you can be an officer, but do not apply for a position higher than jinsa. How high should you reach to satisfy your career ambitions without going too far? And that brings us to rule number 2. Rule number 2 is, give back to society if you have more than 10,000 sacks of rice. The purpose of this rule seems to be not to put such a hard burden on the farming tenants under their employ, and to avoid the envy of the king. At the end of the day, being able to set your own limits keeps you from being too hard and extractive on your customers and employees. It enables you to build goodwill with others. It keeps you from working 80-hour weeks when you already have enough money. The Choi clan were wise to peg this to a commodity that was also necessary for life, because its value would remain stable through currency inflation and devaluations. If we tried to do the same thing with dollars, the same rule set in 1950 would be completely irrelevant in the year of our Lord 2025. Give back to society when you have more than 10,000 sacks of rice. In your family and in your business, what are your sacks of rice? And what is your number? Rule number 3. Do not buy land in the year of bad harvest. The Gyeongju Choi Clan started just before the industrial age took off, so this was a solid rule in preventing your neighbors from holding a grudge. This rule can be simply put: don't take advantage of your neighbor during times of crisis. Either don't buy things from them during a bad year, or give them nearly pre-crisis price terms. Just because it's not illegal to kick your neighbor when they're down, that does not mean you should do it. How far should you go with this? It's up to you and the family culture you wish to develop. I know the stock market is a place where people can short sell and do a number of things that benefit when a company or asset class's value goes down. The existence of short sales, put options, and credit default swaps, when not performed by massive institutions, can act as a warning so that people in those industries can act more prudently and perhaps mitigate an oncoming crisis. And people who notice glaring weaknesses should be rewarded for pointing them out, like the Michael Burrys of the world. Any rule, however, that prevents you from taking advantage of a neighbor in their hour of need will be a good defense for your family. In the event of civil war, your neighbors may be praying for the day your estate can become collateral damage without legal repercussions. The non-state actors who live in your town can be your best friend or your worst enemy, and the degree to which you have their best interests in mind is a buffer zone against the evil in their hearts. That is, unless they're communist revolutionaries, in which case your goodwill is a case study that their ideology is less successful than yours, and if that's the case, you just need to get out of there fast. Do not buy land in the year of bad harvest. Whether your business is agrarian, industrial, or information-related, what is the equivalent for you and your family? Rule 4 is simple but timeless. Give a traveler warm hospitality. This has been a rule that has kept people alive since the Bronze Age. Consider Abraham, who housed the 3 strangers who visited his camp, or the writing of Paul in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. If you can use an RV, a tiny home, or maintain a separate housing for travelers, or have a spare room where travelers can safely stay, then you can apply this rule. Some communities even have hotel rooms above their churches so guests have a place to stay. So this rule can be applied on a community level, even if no individual in that community is very rich. Give a traveler warm hospitality. We've made it to the second to last rule, and that's rule number 5. Let no one living within a 24-mile or 40-kilometer radius die of hunger. The Chois were rich, and so they considered their area of influence to be 24 miles. Imagine anybody poor living within that 24 miles. The security they have of knowing that no matter how bad things get, if they are truly in need, the local Choi clan will help them. Everyone within that radius is now invested in protecting the Choi clan, providing them with information, favors, and popular support. Better the Choi family be rich in these lands than some of these other greedy landowners, they would say. Fun fact: during the Korean War, the only province left holding out against the communists, until the Americans came to help, was Gyeongsang, very near the Choi clan holdings. Part of this was geography and the timing of the American police action that it was called at the time. But it also could be possible that folks like the Chois and this sort of culture had built up enough goodwill so that the South Koreans could hold out just long enough for a miracle. Let no one living within a 24-mile radius die of hunger. What is your sphere of influence? Finally, we've made it to the sixth, final, and most oddly specific rule of the Choi clan. Rule 6 says, let your daughter-in-law wear plain cotton clothes for 3 years after marriage. The biggest risk in growing human capital is the people you bring into the family who are already grown up. They have their own values, upbringing, and characteristics. Not to say that young babies are born with a completely blank slate, but adults have more unlearning to do. If the Choi clan could see how people behave on TikTok and Instagram today, they might extend their rule to 5 years. When a person gets newly married, especially into a rich family, there is a temptation to show off that fresh new status, to wear the designer outfits, fancy jewelry, become a socialite, maybe treat with contempt those who until recently were their social equals. Leaving aside the rich silks and sumptuous satins for plain cotton for 3 years kept that impulse in check. Even if they hold on to that attitude for 3 years until they can finally dress like a noble, that's still 3 years of learning the new family's culture, which will have an effect. Clothes don't make the man necessarily, but they do prepare your mind to accept the cultural meanings behind them when worn consistently. This is only helpful if the cotton clothes and the mindset of comfort, living with simplicity and humility, are worn in the mind after the 3 years are over. Here are the Gyeongju Choi Clan rules one more time for review. Number 1, you can be an officer, but do not apply for a position higher than jinsa. 2, give back to society if you have more than 10,000 sacks of rice. 3, do not buy land in the year of bad harvest. 4, give a traveler warm hospitality. 5, let no one living within a 24-mile radius die of hunger. And 6, let your daughter-in-law wear plain cotton clothes for 3 years after marriage. So, what do you think? Are you going to make your daughter-in-law wear a potato sack for the first 4 years of married life? Or maybe your mother-in-law? Will you make sure everyone within 3 miles can eat bagels? Even if you're not, maybe it's time for your family to have these conversations. Remember that any rules worth keeping must have a fundamental principle or cultural value underlying them. They must also be intuitive enough to explain to family members of any age, and must be sustainable for the people living them out. The Gyeongju Choi clan lived in a Buddhist country, but they demonstrated practical godliness by turning their principles into action and how they treated their fellow man. In your conversations with your family wealth group, the people with whom you listen to this podcast before or during your meetings, ask some questions. You can ask any that you want, but some good ones are, is the way we do business creating ill will with our neighbors, engendering the unnecessary envy of others in our social circles, or painting a target on our backs for the state in the form of taxation or confiscatory action? What rules can we put in place that are likely to be true in any generation that can limit, reduce, or eliminate these negative trends and build goodwill with our community? What are our family's values, and what rules can we put in place that allow us to live those values sustainably? Ask your family elders if there were any values their parents or grandparents tried to pass down that may have been lost to history, which your family may try to revive. If you don't know your family's values or haven't crystallized them yet, that's okay. We can go over this in a future episode. If you have rules that have helped your family, or know other families whose rules have helped them to survive persecution and avoid the malignant envy of others, join the Substack and share it in the comments for this podcast. If you're not part of the Substack, I invite you to join it. There I'll share other families' rules, or kihun, that other Korean clans have used to maintain their power and influence for centuries. These principles were internal laws and moral guidelines copied into household registers and taught to children. I've chosen to focus on this particular clan because they didn't use the power of the throne, and so I thought it was more actionable for most of us because not everyone can be a king or a queen. Until then, I'll see you in the next episode, and remember, the struggles you face today, you not only can solve, but you can solve for the generations that come after you.